Hey everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Northwest Craftsman. Today I'm going to be tackling an organization project and turning this into this. So sit back, relax, and enjoy the process of me building this. I'll walk you through what I'm doing every step of the way. Here we go. While I am unloading the lumber and moving the boxes, I wanted to discuss some of the priorities in building the shelf, which helped to influence the design. First, the shelf needed to be able to accommodate more than just the Costco style of totes. 2, I wanted to minimize the number of cuts that I needed to make, and then 3, I wanted to reduce the cost as much as possible. In the end, each one of the different shelves ended up being about $4.30 per slot, or about $260 for this 60 box shelf. I'll go through the math in a little bit more detail at the end. If you have a concrete floor, this step is not going to be necessary, but it is helpful if you have a gravel floor to make sure that it is level all the way across the site so that your shelves don't have to bend very much as they're trying to get set up. In this case, I was using a laser level and just a stick that I had lying around so that I could get an idea for where my high spots and low spots were, and then using a rake to make sure that everything was leveled out within about a 1/4 inch. Once I had that, I thought I'd cleared enough space inside my shop, but it turns out that I most definitely did not have enough space, so I had to move everything outside. Not a bad deal, since right now in Oregon we were having a very sunny stretch of weather. The first step for each one of the major wall segments is to clamp them all together so that they stay put and mark out where all the cross members are going to go. This ensures that I don't need to do any measuring while I'm trying to assemble it. For me, because we were trying to accommodate so many different boxes, I ended up using the largest box we had and then add 2 inches to all dimensions, which means I get about 1 inch of space on each side. Then, because I wasn't working on a perfectly flat surface, I tacked in each one of the vertical members with 1 nail at the bottom, and then I measured it all out, got my top plate on, and then made sure it was square by measuring diagonal to diagonal. Those 2 measurements should be exactly the same if your frame is square. And then I made sure that the spacing was proper at the top plate, which meant that each one of my vertical members was perpendicular to the bottom. Once all of that was confirmed, I was able to tack everything in and then go through and put the rest of the cross members together, which was a lot easier since I had already pre-marked everything out. I'll talk more specifically about the exact dimensions I use at the end of the video. With your first wall done, just copy and paste to make the second. Now is also a good time as a reminder to always buy a little bit of extra lumber than you need, because you never quite know when you're going to run into a bark inclusion in the middle of your 2x4. Moving both of those larger walls into the shop, I can slowly do it as one person. If you have an extra set of hands, it will be a little bit easier, as these are pretty heavy because they are green lumber. When you bring them in, just make sure to stack them face to face or back to back so that they are mirroring each other. Next up, with the center divider, I did effectively the same thing, except I had the 2x4x8s that run vertically with their face out as opposed to their edge out, so that it took up a little bit less space in the middle of the line. Next, I wanted to make sure that everything was stacked up against the wall, and in my case, I am securing it to the wall to make sure that it's impossible for it to tip over. Given the aspect ratio of the shelf, it's not likely that it's going to tip over, but with small kids that like to climb over everything, I wanted to make sure that it was. In this case, again, if you have a second set of hands, it will be a little bit easier to both hold this upright and plumb, rather than me who had to kind of go back and forth to get it right. How your existing shop walls are set up will determine what length of screws you need, but effectively I tried to go through the 2x4 at the end and then into the stud that was in my wall. So for me, that was about 2 to 2.5 inch screws. With the 2 outer walls secured, I can now move the center portion into the middle to get it ready to secure. The cross members which will support the actual boxes are made out of ripped 2x4s, but I need to cut them down to length so that they fit within the frame. To do this consistently, it helps to have a stop block that you can just shove them up against every time, so that you only need to measure once, and then you can just rip through the rest of them or cross cut through the rest of them all at once. That cut and this following cut are really the only ones that I had to do on the entire project, and in this case you see me trying to align my table saw to perfectly cut the 2x4s in half. Other than that, I wasn't doing any other cuts. After I had ripped all 30 of those 2x4s in half, it was time to start mounting those in, and to do so I wanted to mark the different bays so that I didn't have to measure it every single time. In my case, with the size of my boxes, it was about 7.5 and 15 inches in from the edge. Honestly, both on building the walls and in doing this portion, spending the time ahead to mark everything made a huge difference on quality of life. Seriously, take the time to do it. In my design, each one of the cross members gets a single nail into the end, and then at the center where it is resting on the 2x4x12, it will get a nail to secure it in place, which also helps to secure that center wall. The 2x4x12s on that center wall are offset down by about 1 3/4 inches so that they accommodate to the half 2x4s running across. Where the cross members get to the edge, they are flush with the top so that we can slide the boxes in and out without any challenge. By and large, this did work out very well, though where I had stuff too close to the frame on the ends, it was pretty difficult difficult to get the nails through, so if you can do this in an open space, all the better. If you noticed, I put all the nails in on the left-hand side, did the center column, and then I waited on these nails on the right so that I could use pipe clamps to pull it together so it was a nice and tight fit before everything got nailed. For extra credit, you can add a sheet of OSB to the end. It really doesn't need to be that thick. That will allow some extra rigidity and keep it from wiggling around too much. I was using 1/2-inch OSB here because that's what I had extra left on hand, but honestly a 1/4-inch piece of plywood or similar, and frankly even particle board, would probably be fine because this is the same exact principle that they use in cheap furniture to keep it more rigid. And then we do the last step of loading up all the boxes into their individual cubbies. I am honestly so thrilled with how this turned out because now instead of going out to the shop and inevitably having to grab the box that is on the bottom of the pile, I can grab any one of them individually, front side or back side, and we can use all of the totes that we already had on hand rather than needing to spend an arm and a leg to replace them with all of these beautiful uniform Costco totes. Maybe eventually, but no. Alrighty, let's start talking a little bit about the cost and the design. Starting with the cost, the horizontal outside members are 2x4x12s, and I had 15 of those running at $7.60 a piece. The vertical members, both in the center walls and the edge walls, were 2x4x8s, running at $2.65 a piece, and then the supports for each one of the shelves were the ripped 2x4x8s, also running at $2.65 a piece. I also threw in $10 worth of hardware for a total of $259.15. Now at 60 shelves for this unit, that comes out to $4.32 per shelf. If you're going to do a much smaller version, it will probably be a little bit more than that just because of the infrastructure around it, but pretty good all things considered. For this next part, I'd like to focus on the design and some of the specifics around the design. From the beginning, we wanted to design this around the biggest tote that we had around the variety. Now, for us, this turned out to be the Costco Tote, which had the dimensions of about 20.5 inches wide by 30.5 inches deep by 14.5 inches tall. Now again, if these were the only totes that we had, I would have done a similar slide-in shelf like you see all over the internet right now, where you slide it in on this portion of the rack. But again, we had to fit all of these other totes, so we didn't have that option. Given these constraints and the desire to cut as little as possible, I decided on a 12-foot long shelf that was 8 feet tall. This gave me room to space each one of my cavities 24 inches on center, 19 inches tall board to board, and then 32 inches deep for a doubling space of 64 inches from board to board. Alrighty, and now for the assembly. So this is going to look a little bit complicated up at the front, but I'm going to try and break it down piece by piece. First, we had the vertical boards for the front and the back, and onto those we attached the horizontal 2x4x12s, just like we showed in the video. Then using two 3.5-inch nails, I attached them through the face to the boards behind them. Again, the center is almost the exact same as the outside, except you have face to face instead of face to edge, and in this case I secured those two faces together with 2 3/8-inch nails so that they didn't pop through the back side, and I used 3 of them at each one of the joints. I also spaced those center 2x4x12s down by 1 3/4 inches compared to the outside so that the center cross members could rest on top of them as they passed over them. The cross members were the only pieces that I cut, which were the 2x4x8s cut down to 64 inches, and then I ripped them in half so that you had 1 3/4 inches on both sides. I made sure to put the bull nose side up and attached this to the edge with 1 nail through the face of the outside board, and then I did it to the center by using 1 nail through the bull nose side into that center 2x4x12. Well, that was an absolute mouthful. If you have any questions at all about this entire process, go ahead and leave it in the comment section down below. Again, thank you guys for sticking with me so long, especially if you went through that entire description there at the end. I'd be more than happy to help you if you guys are building your own. Again, I know this is a little bit unique compared to one of the other ones that you see online, but hopefully it fits your needs as well as it does mine. Thank you guys for joining me. I really appreciate it. We'll see you next time. Bye.